Recording.
Yes. Sorry, I've been in a car for 2 hour and a half.
Kenmore City Council's non-session. Will the, give me a chance to smile.
She was just snapping the floor.
Please don't.
Please take the roll.
Mayor Baker.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Van Ness. Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Sperry.
Here.
Councilmember Curtis.
Present.
Councilmember Herbig.
Here.
Councilmember Danuski.
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. Mender. Oh, yeah. Would you be so kind? Would you please join Mr. Mender in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If there are no objections to the agenda, stand approved as written. Yes.
You weren't speaking very loudly.
Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda is a presentation for the Love of Kenmore mini grant award to Kent Sturgis and Dennis Mindry. Mr. Carlindsey, if you would, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You all may recall that last April of 2015, we had quite the event here in this room. A lot of people showed up for it. It was called For the Love of Kenmore, and it was put on by Peter Kageyama, who talked about civic identity and creating civic opportunities and love notes in our city, and there was part of the event included a contest of sorts. There were about 8 or 10 tables, about 5 people per table in the room, and Peter Kageyama asked each table to come up with what he calls a love note, or something that could engage people civically in the city. And so all the tables in the room came up with different proposals for love notes, and then they came up and presented their different ideas. Each table presented their ideas, and then everybody in the room voted on them. And the proposal that got the most votes by far was the table that Dennis Mindry and Kent Sturgis were sitting at, and that was to beautify the cement silos at the Cal Portland site, to do some sort of a mural on them. And that one proposal got more votes than all of the other proposals combined. And so they were the winners of the mini grant that was given that night, and the mini grant came from the community, not from the city. Donations from local businesses like Key Bank and Michelman Insurance and the UPS store, and some private individuals. And so Kent Sturgis and Dennis Mindry had to do some legwork and reach out to Cal Portland to see if they were even open to this idea. And turns out they were, and then they needed a few months to work out a letter of agreement on how it would all work, and they got that signed. And so as a result, they have received the mini grant, the $500 mini grant, and they have deposited it in a bank account, I believe, and this will be kind of the seed money to start a fundraising effort through like a GoFundMe or crowdfunding type effort to raise more money to get the design funded. So they have received the money and they are marching forward. And Dennis and Kent, do you mind coming up and saying a few words?
So I'd first like to thank the city of Kenmore for coming up with that great idea for the love of Kenmore, and then for the citizens who were at that meeting to vote us into our position, which is to continue with this project of beautifying the Cal Portland concrete plant. And to this point, as our city manager, Rob Carlinzi, has shared, we are under an agreement with Cal Portland. They're extremely excited about, let's say, changing their image a little. And now we've gotten through that part, and we've found a vendor that will possibly be able to do either individual banners for each tank, 60 foot tall by whatever the width is to wrap a greater part of the tank, or they can even sew the banners together, the artistic designs together, and end up with one great big mural to cover the entire structures. So a lot of flexibility there, but we are in the process of now getting the funding to do that, as well as gathering the artwork. So we are looking for volunteers to assist in that. Was there anything else?
Well, we've spent a fair amount of time on this in the last 6 or 8 months, but believe it or not, we've had very little discussion about really what might go on those silos. We've talked about the method of applying images, but not really content. And now we can kind of get into that, and we intend to figure out a way to involve the public, get lots of ideas, and come up with a process to select a winner. And also we gave ourselves a name, kind of an ambitious name, which sort of implies things in the future which have neither been discussed nor planned. Our name is the what is the name?
You came up with it.
The Highway 522 Beautification Committee.
So we're very excited about continuing this project, and as excited about some volunteers coming forward to assist in it, as well as the responses that I've gotten thus far from the community, where I've said, you know, we're going to do these concrete plants, you know, da-da-da-da-da. They go, oh, really? Oh, that's really neat. And, you know, when you get your funding site figured out and how you're going to do it, let us know. And our intent is to be able to keep as far away from the cash as we can. So we will do it through an online funding site, which will then go into the account, and with the help of the committee, make some decisions, and then the help of the community to make the final decisions on the artwork. The CMAX plant, which is the asphalt plant, the other two towers, they have shown an interest in doing their towers as well. And actually the price that we've gotten to do this is obtainable. And it's a material that will actually be strapped onto the tanks and have at least a 5+ year longevity. So they should look nice for a long period of time, whatever the community chooses. I think that's it.
All right. Your Honor, if I could add a couple more things.
Please.
One of the principles that Peter Kageyama teaches is giving citizens permission to do these kinds of things without necessarily involving the government. And this is one of those cases. Even though we facilitated the Peter Kageyama event, this particular project is not a city project. It's strictly between the volunteers and Cal Portland. The money came from the community, not from the city. And so that's one thing I want to emphasize, and that's one of the beauties of what's happening here is we have citizens acting, you know, independently and not necessarily needing the government's permission to bring love notes to the city. I do need to pass on, I did commit to a couple citizens that I would pass on to you, that there are a couple of citizens phone calls I got today that they object to this. If I can try to summarize what they said, but basically they believe that there are people that are suffering health effects from what's coming from the Cal Portland site, and they don't feel like we should we or anybody should be encouraging them and facilitating things like this. So I did commit to them that I would pass that on to you tonight. But that said, I don't want to put a damper on what's going on either. I think what these two gentlemen and the volunteers that are helping them are doing is a neat thing, and it's a great citizen-led effort. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie, you've got what you need, right? All right. Next item on the agenda, citizen comments. It's an opportunity for you to express your views on issues that are important to you and to the community. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. There's a timer up there, and although we don't bang the gavel, we ask you to please try and respect the time limits. Clerk, please first call for the first person.
Grazina Prouty.
Okay, and I have also...
I need your name and address to start.
Okay, the address is on file. My name is Grażyna Prouty, and I would like to ask who I can give the paperwork. Who is the person?
The city clerk.
Okay. Okay, so it turns out that it's very interesting. When I started to research the St. Edward Seminary and the park, and of course I mentioned that I'm for saving it, I noticed that there is no original contract neither in Diocese of Seattle nor in King County. So if you locate this contract original, please let me know. And also the number, the documentation, 99 pages, is filed under agency record. The same for National Park Service and Washington State Park Service. I found the documentation that is probably on Parks should have it, and it's not the full copy. And these things are National Register of Historic Places. I believe that it's absolutely necessary for us to preserve historic places, and I, as a teacher, I'm still Washington State certified, but I have parallel information what can happen and what evil, administrative evil can happen, and we all have to be on alert with it, concerning it. So I write about United Nations Sustainable Development. I also put the information on the fact that Washington State, and I give the bill in 2011, put in DES, Department of Enterprise Services, $1 billion annually for different things, and there are divisions, so please refer to what I am writing and have a context of conscience that we need to start with ourselves. And I noticed that first, when Washington State Park got the started to be this I will not say, well, anyway, the time came, so I'm nervous. But anyway, I noticed they removed the crucifix We don't know what happened to Grotto. So first thing, they started with, even in communist era, as you know, I come originally from Poland, the crosses and crucifixes were preserved in development. But I give you one handout, and please reflect, because the conscience of society goes down when everything, and I have here something that lets me reflect. I am a person and I want to live. So the communists in 1960s legalized abortion like it's legalized here. So that's when 10 Commandments started to dissolve. People, even Catholics, 56% of them don't know 10 Commandments. So if you don't know, you don't exercises in your life. So I really encourage you in this time of reflection, as St. Edward Park and Seminary is in that historic document that I put as a first document in the appendix. It's the place for reflection, and we really need to preserve the heritage, see what corporations are there. There are different laws that were during the hearing. We got only one RCWs. There are many more that apply. So please do your work like I did, and hopefully that contract can be located, and we'll see who is the owner and what really is in that contract. And last sentence, in this second document I'm giving on historic places, it's only a part of it, because some pages are like 307, so it must be a vast document, and I would like you to locate it, let me know. And citizens should have the right to look at original contract and all these, all the documentation that is there, because I saw what is happening in education, and I would not know. I started to research when I appealed in the court, and I saw the courts absolutely have contempt for original, for average citizen, including teachers. So I was really blown away, but my research gave me some answers, and I'm sharing with you. So if you are shocked, I was shocked too, but these are the answers what really is going on in our country. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Protek.
There's no one else signed up.
All right. Ms. Protek, thank you very much for your comments, and we'll certainly make sure that your comments get forwarded on to state parks. It is state parks properties, not the cities, and we will make sure that you get that, it will get forwarded to them. So thank you.
Interest in your city. Thank
you
so much.
Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda stands approved as written. In case you're wondering why I'm talking like this, I had a tooth pulled, so there's packing up there. Okay, so then next item then is 2016 grant strategy, Mrs. Bent. I guess that's Parks grant strategy for 2016.
Good evening, Council, and joining me this evening is Mark Connolly, the City's Parks Project Manager. There will be a presentation this evening, if you could raise your screens. And while we're getting that loaded up, I'd just like to say that we're looking for Council feedback tonight on potential park projects to move forward with applications to the 2016 Washington State Recreation Conservation Office, RCO, grant cycle. The RCO grant cycle is every 2 years in even years. The application deadline is May 2nd, but we do need time to get the materials put together and any other council action that's needed to get those complete. And we also understand that the decision on which park projects are selected is also dependent on council direction regarding project funding for a ballot measure, which is scheduled for discussion next Monday, February 22nd. The park projects that staff selected were based on several factors, including their readiness, their eligibility, and resources, and those that would also move forward community and council goals. We reviewed potential projects and developed two recommendations, one assuming no ballot measure and one with a ballot measure. The projects identified that assume no ballot measure also took into account the city's ability to certify availability of matching funds based on current resources. Some of the projects identified assuming a ballot measure could also be phased with applications over several grant cycles to maximize potential grant funding. We met with Kim Sellers, who's the city's designated RCO project manager, last week to review potential projects and their eligibility for meeting the grant criteria. And during that meeting, an alternative project was discussed, which was a boardwalk that would connect from the access driveway at Rhododendron Park up to the pathway that connects from Juanita Drive into the park. So that's an additional project, and that will be part of our discussion this evening. And I also want to just emphasize that the project cost estimates are subject to change. Some of these projects are really early on in conceptual design, so the numbers you see, might change as we move forward into project design. So Mark will now give a 15-minute PowerPoint presentation. He's going to talk fast, and he will highlight the available grants and the staff proposal, and he's going to move pretty quickly through the background slides for each grant category that highlight eligibility criteria and past grant funding. But these are important because they do provide sort of the framework for the grants. So following the presentation, we're here to answer questions during council discussion. Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's been quite a while since I've been able to meet with the council, so it's a real honor as always. So again, I'm going to try to follow Debbie's direction and not spend the 3 hours that I had planned on giving to walk you through really what Grants 101 is. So as I go through these slides, I'm not going to read them all. I suspect that you can probably do the same thing that I did while I was trying to put these together to try to make some sense of all of this. So really my intent here as I go through kind of showing you what the state grant process is and what the grants are available to the cities to kind of pull back the curtain just a little bit. Because it does take a substantial amount of staff time, as Debbie alluded to not only prepare the grants, but also strategically target, the proper programs to give us the best chance to succeed. So with that, I'll move on to the first slide. And this is generally what we'll cover. And that's just kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit, pretend I'm the Wizard of Oz, and when we're all done, we'll all be hopping merrily down the yellow brick road, and hopefully we'll be able to succeed in whatever grant applications that we make for either this year or the coming years. So next is, what is the RCO? And I think this is really, really important because this kind of stresses the value that the state grant process is to not only local government, but also state government itself. So over 50 years, you can see that there's been almost $2 billion of grant support that's been distributed throughout the state to support public projects. Now, just that number alone, if you think about a 50% grant match, That's almost $4 billion. So I want to kind of put that in perspective. That's really, really important, not only to Kenmore, but all the other residents in the state of Washington who derive benefit from either local parks to prepare, the protection of habitat and conservation. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's why this is so important. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is what grant programs does the state RCO administer? Well, they administer over 15 different grant programs. Well, tonight I'm just going to focus on 3. And they're the primary grant programs that the city would more than likely apply for if it had eligible programs or it had funding in place to apply for these grants. And, of course, they appeared in some plan and you were ready for them. So the 3 programs I'm going to talk about are these. And as you can see, this slide illustrates really where does the money come from, how much money is available and when, and whether it's available on a regular basis. And I think that's really, really important. So take a look at the amounts available and whether it's available every single year, which is not typical, but generally every other year. And I just want to note that with respect to the youth athletic facility funds, it's very irregular. So probably in the past 15 years, there have only been 3 grant cycles, and you'll see that a little bit later. So the first program I'm going to talk about is the ALEA program, and this is funded through the Department of Natural Resources, and that's where if you're paying a lease for aquatic lands, your money goes into this pot, and then it's distributed to local agencies. So what happens every 2 years? Local agencies and even the state make application to the state for grants, and they make these types of grant applications. And so what this slide is showing you is how much is available to be distributed on a grant if you're successful. And as you can tell, the acquisition projects, actually you have more money available to you than if you were just going in strictly with a development project. The tricky part in all this, if you might remember in my prior slide, is the ALA program essentially only has $5 million available every biennium. So if there are a lot of projects, you might imagine that money could get swallowed up pretty quickly. So it just kind of harkens back to the notion that you have to have a pretty good and strong application and a real good purpose to really do well. So what I've just alluded to is this notion of all these grant programs being very, very competitive. And you're going to kind of see these sets of slides kind of repeat themselves as I go through each one of the different programs to kind of give you a flavor of, what happened last year and what types of projects are targeted. So with this, just remember, more often than not, a 50% grant match is required, and you'll see here that only half the grants that were applied for last year in this program were actually funded. Another unique thing about ALEA grants is that any of the projects that are applied for must be on navigable waters. And more often than not, if you notice the prior slide, is that most of the projects, if you kind of look over history, have basically been marine projects, basically those projects on saltwater. All the east side cities, they've been the rare successful applicants for being able to make successful applicants on freshwater. So what are the eligible projects? This list tells you what ALEA projects are eligible. I won't go through each and every one of those. I might just kind of mention is that the best local example of a successful ALEA project for development, if you go to Juanita Bay Park that project was funded through ALEA, primarily with restoration and public access. And public access is appropriate public access is a real critical component of this program. If you can't provide public access to the parcel that you're identifying, ALEA will not fund it. So it's not just a conservation grant. It is one that provides for suitable public access and interpretation if you can provide it. Each one of my slides for these programs, I'll also talk a little bit about, okay, what are the no-nos? You know, don't bother making an application if this is one of your ideas for using the grant program. So, no, most of these grant programs don't allow you to put your offices in there and putting your maintenance and operations facilities. Also, having mandated or required mitigation actions that are related to some other project. So let's say if we were doing something, and I'm just going to use it for instance, let's say we were doing something at Log Boom, and the mitigation effort that was required, we could only do it at Squires Landing. Well, we couldn't go after a Squires Landing grant and pay for that Log Boom mitigation through this grant. It has to be on-site and related to the project that we're doing physically on that property. So concludes your, now you're all experts with the Aquatic Land Enhancement Account. The next one is a little bit more complicated. That's WWRP, and that's the Washington Recreation and Wildlife Program. So the next slide basically talks about its organization, because there are programs within this program. There are 4 accounts, and the 2 arrows that you see above are the two primary accounts that this program assigns funding for. And if you notice that there's 50% and 50%, so basically 50% of the allocation of the bonds that are sold related to this program are allocated between these 2 accounts. Now, if the legislature appropriates more than $40 million in the biennium, the farmland preservation accounts and the riparian protection account, they actually get money based on a formula. But I didn't put that up here because we're not really have any programs associated with those. So within that habitat account and outdoor recreation account, there's actually subcategories of grants that are available to the state and local agencies to fund. And those are allocated on a proportional basis based on the amount of funding that the legislature provides during the biennium. And what I'm showing here in this slide is an example of what would $55 million look like in the biennium and how it would be allocated. And again, that would look a little bit different depending on whether the legislature allocated $65 million or $45 million. And that $55 million here is the average that's been allocated over the life of the program. So the first program or category that I'm going to talk about within the WWRP is local parks. And just by way of some background, Morelands Park and the Tweed acquisition were funded through this program this past year. And remember that I was going to tell you, you're going to see a lot of repeat slides that look very, very similar. The thing to take away from this particular slide is in local parks, only 25% generally of the applications made are successful. And within that 25%, sometimes not the full ask is granted to the agencies, because there is kind of a bottom line of that, 20 or 30%. Sometimes the dollars don't always match up, and sometimes the applicant agencies are asked if they can take a little bit less just to get their project funded. And The other thing I wanted to point out is last year was a remarkable year. It's something that I haven't seen in my nearly 40 years in Parks and Recreation. And that was the legislature basically stepped in and said, we want to fund them all. How do we do that? And they did. That's extraordinary. So when you see that 2014 special appropriations and you see 45 projects funded in addition to the 18, that's what happened. But don't expect that to happen, in the future. That's extraordinary. But I point this out because this is very, very critical because these grants are so competitive. So it's very, very important that we devote our resources to grants that we feel would have a legitimate chance of success. And just like ALEA, there are funding caps. And these are those, depending on what type of grant you're going to submit. These are the maximums that you can expect to be able to be awarded. And just remember, double this. And that's the amount of a project, because you're still expected to come up with a 50% match. So if you were going in and asking for $1 million for an acquisition, you better have $1 million in the bank to spend. And when you go before the rating committees, they're going to ask you where is that, and prove it to us. And again, I talked a little bit about eligible projects for local parks. Pretty much a pretty big universe. One of the things they don't like, though, are these. When you talk about indoor recreation facilities, I like to illustrate community centers would not do well in this program. They basically tell you no. And then I might also point out one other element that's consistent throughout RCO's programs, and that's condemnation. You don't want, they will not fund any acquisition projects that have been involved in condemnation. So just don't even go there. The next project is water access, and this is important because if you looked at the staff recommendation that you see later on in the presentation, the majority of our recommendations are all through this program. And we'll talk about the consequences of making that decision as well later. Again, as you can see, roughly a 25% to 30% success rate. The good thing in this program is that there's not a lot of applications. So your ability to, if you have a great project, to do well is pretty good. But it gives back to, that strategic look at your projects. Do they look good? Do they feel good? Working with your RCO project manager, making sure that you're following their advice and they feel good about your project as well. That's really critical. And again, see that 2014 special appropriations? You're not going to see that again, I don't believe, unless for some reason the economy continues to do just as well it was doing last year. The other thing that's unique about the water access is, as opposed to local parks and even ALEA, there are no funding caps. Something just to kind of keep an eye on. You don't see gigantic projects coming in through water access, and let's say if you go back to this where there's let's say there's $12 million worth of projects, and somebody comes in and they've got a $10 million project and they asked for 5. Conceivably, they could get that and basically reduce the pot that's available to everybody else. So it's just a good idea to kind of keep an eye on who's applying. Those big projects you don't see very often. I think the last one I saw was Metropolitan Parks in Tacoma for Point Defiance. But you can kind of see that that's a huge regional facility, and that was a $3 million ask that they had that they got funded. But that's rare. So these are the types of eligible projects in water access. And, it basically speaks to what the title of this grant program is, getting people specifically to the water somehow, and including the support facilities to go along with them. So what are the no's? You're detecting a pattern. So basically, you're looking at free public access, free use, more often than not. Anytime you see concession buildings and those types of things, the RCO is thinking, well, this is more of a retail-like operation. So the last program I was going to talk about is the youth athletic fields. And if you remember back on the original slides that I had, is that the grant cycle is very irregular. And remember, that came from the proceeds of the Seahawks Stadium, so there's no guarantee that's going to be around forever. I'm kind of amazed that there's still funding in that program now anyway. This was what occurred in this past year, and again, that was an extraordinary thing that happened at the legislature. In fact, we didn't become aware that actually there was going to be funding, even though we were asked to make application until September. There was no guarantee that there was even going to be a program. So I guess the message that I'm delivering to the city is that when the opportunity is there, and these facilities are important to you, sometimes it makes sense to make the application. We did that with Morelands at the last minute, and strangely enough, they decided to fund it, and it was, I hate to say, it's kind of like the lottery. If you don't play, you're not going to win. Well, we won. And that resulted in another $137,000 that the city hadn't really counted on in supporting that park facility. Again, these are the funding caps. What's unusual about YAF is there's a floor and there's a ceiling. None of the other grants really have floors. And I think the intent of this program is to recognize that when they grant the money through this program, they want to make sure that it's going to have some substantive impact to the community, and that's why there's a floor. This next project or slide, when I talk about eligible projects, it looks very similar, but there's one really key element with the YAF fund. It funds renovation, not new facilities. That's its purpose. So when you see those floors like $25,000, you're thinking of probably small athletic field facilities, play fields, where maybe it's just something as simple as renovating turf, putting in new under drainage, or putting in underground irrigation, as simple as that. When you look at large facilities, it's basically doing it all. And yes, synthetic turf is eligible as an upgrade, but this program will look at facilities that are being improved, not new facilities. That's a critical piece. So there's your no-nos. So those are the kind of the three key RCO grant programs that the city probably more commonly will use than others. Debbie touched a little bit on the strategies that are important to employ as you make those decisions about which projects to target, or even whether or not to pursue grants at all. There's no reason that the state doesn't force you to go out and apply for their money. In fact, I don't think there's a long track record yet of Kenmore having done this, and I think that's something just to kind of keep in mind. So simple eligibility, you've seen that list. It's important for staff when they work with the RCO to take a look at, okay, what's the scoring evaluators? Are there any trends that are beginning to kind of manifest themselves that hadn't in prior years? A good example would be in local parks. One of the trends is that they are looking to fund active facilities more so than passive. So keep an eye on those types of things. That wasn't always the case. So that's why it's important to kind of work with your RCO advisors, because they kind of know what's happening. I talked a little bit about the fact that the staff recommendation and water access, all of our programs are in there. Competition. We can compete not only with others, but we can also be competing amongst ourselves. Sometimes that's just kind of the way it is. Because if you decide not to apply because you're competing against yourself, you may not apply. But I guess one of the things I want to mention is that when you do that, if you have a project that is more important to you than the other, you might get the other. Okay, just be cognizant of that. Because sitting before a rating committee that's seen 2 of your other projects and you go in with 3, sometimes they ask the question you don't want to answer, and that is which one, if you had to pick one, which one would it be? And so just be careful about what your answer might be. You might get it, or that might be a good thing. But then competition with others. Whatever application you make, it must be strong, or I wouldn't waste your effort. And if you go down a couple things where it says resources, you notice that little piece of slide? That's about how many staff hours it takes for each individual grant that you might make to the RCO. That's a considerable amount of staff time. So I just kind of put that in your brain because certainly you might have, you could have 15 really wonderful projects, but you may not have the resources to do something well enough to score. So I just want to keep that in mind. Maximizing funding. You can actually make application between different grant programs. So for example, you could have a program that conceivably could score well in ALEA and also in WWRP. And when you have those opportunities, certainly I would encourage the city to take advantage of those, because that could mean the difference between $5 million, 500,000. That's a big difference, isn't it? 500,000 and $1 million towards a project. To just keep that in mind when you meet with your RCO advisors to find out whether or not you have projects that might qualify within the different programs. And then, really importantly, readiness. Are you ready to move forward with this? And the RCO will look long and hard at whether or not you're ready. I think internally we need to do that too. You know, do you have an adopted plan? Those types of things. So I've talked a little bit about what this means on this slide. Because when you go in for your applications and they're finalized, and when you get to the kind of the next step, you have to show that it's funded. Okay, you just can't go in there and go, well, you know, we're kind of waiting to see what you're going to do. You can kind of play that game for a little bit, but at some point in time, you know, you have to show that you've got the money and the wherewithal to do this. Is there an adopted master plan? Or an adopted conceptual plan? That's important. So whatever project you move forward with, is the council at some level will have had to have adopted something that basically says that, you know, the community has looked at this. This is exactly what we want to see that's to happen here. So it has to be something that has your seal of approval on it. It can't be Mark's seal of approval. They know better than to just take that. Also, status of permitting, although not a end all, but they just so that the city knows where it is in the permitting process and understands whether or not a project has some serious pitfalls. You know, so you're not putting forth a project that, in all likelihood, wouldn't be able to get through the permitting process. So something just to be cognizant of. State funding, we've talked about that a little bit, but the last thing too is that if the project doesn't appear in your pros plan, remember your pros plan is very, very important. One of the reasons why we went through the effort to work with the community and get this adopted was so that we would be eligible for these types of grants. Okay? So whatever project that we put forward an application has to appear somehow, somewhere in their pros plan. And they also have to meet the eligibility criteria for the program also. You know, don't try to shoehorn it in. If there's any question on the part of the RCO whether it fits, believe them. That's important. And will you be competitive? So that leads us to the staff recommendation. And we have 2 slides. One is the staff recommendation, and really what that talks about is, you know, what are the grants that staff is suggesting that we invest resources in to move forward in this biennium for RCO grants. And as I mentioned to you before, all of these are water access. but having met with the RCO staff, these are all strong projects. They've seen the conceptual plans and they've seen the adopted plans as well. And I think you know the background behind each one of these projects, so I won't go through that unless you want me to be able to do that. But I kind of walk you through this table real quickly. Each one of the projects is identified. The total project cost is in the left-hand column. What our grant request would be is in the middle, and what the city match requirement would be. Now, Debbie had alluded to a new project being the boardwalk, so I just stuck it in there in red to illustrate what would happen if that became the project. So you'll notice that the rhododendron project gets bigger. That's probably the key element to kind of to note there. Yes.
Thank you. Mark, so the top line where it says 145, 70, and then the asterisk, is that just the float part
That
of it?
is just the float.
And then the 800, the line in red, does not include the float, or it does include the float?
It does include the float. It would basically combine those two projects
Yes.
together into
Okay.
one.
Thank you.
Nigel.
Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but wouldn't the total alternate be over $1 million?
Good question. You see where it says alternate in red on the far right?
Okay.
So it would just, the alternate recommendation would be just those two projects and not Squires Landing Phase 1.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Should I go on to the next one? Any questions about the staff recommendation here?
Stacy's got a question.
Councilmember Smith and then go to Councilmember Danuski.
Mark, I have a question on the timeline. When you said about what you can commit to, you need to have the dollars set aside as a city to understand what you can apply for. Can you give me a rough idea of how that guideline works? Because obviously, if we're applying for some grants, and if they're part of, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but if they're part of a bond, then clearly passage or not passage makes a difference on whether or not you have the funds available from the city end.
Absolutely. And some of it is kind of how you articulate things. There's nothing wrong with you articulating that funds would be coming from a bond. Okay? The thing that you would end up dealing with at certification is that would still be there. Now, mind you, the recommendation that would go to the governor, and I was going to talk a little bit about this a little bit later, was kind of the timeline and how the grants work. But it's certainly possible that you could find out that your grant has made the funding list prior to, let's say, a bond passing.
Okay.
Or you could find that you made it on the funding list and you just found out that the bond didn't pass. And in that case, what you would do is you'd withdraw your application. Now, if you signed your agreement with the RCO, you're on the hook. But let me talk to you a little bit about that. It's about an 18-month process from the point that you make application. So let's say it's May. So 18 months after that, you should have the agreement in hand with the RCO.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councilmember Danuski.
Can I add to that question? Can I add to the answer to that question? Sure. Yeah, we talked to Kim Sellers last week about that very question. What if we have things that are subject to a bond issue that we're applying for a match? And she said that certification of our match wouldn't occur until the following year, until 2017. And so therefore, if the bond issue failed, we could withdraw our application and it wouldn't be held against us.
Great.
Councilmember Danuski.
I have a question on the park acquisition part of the Squires Landing. If we did that with this type of a grant, can can the water access part be active use, or do we have to restore it and the public can't use the water access part of it?
You know, that's a good question. In water access, the intent is very simple. If our purpose for acquiring that piece of property is to gain access to the water, which it would be, then that would be fine. Now, if we were putting ball fields on there, no. So I think
have to restore it to a natural state.
there's no requirement to restore it. You know, they like to have a general idea when you go into with the application about really what your intents are, whether it's to, you know, extend something like a water walk with a trail, if you might consider plans to restore the basin to a more natural shoreline, those types of things, or if you have, if your sole intent is basically to provide people with access to touch the water and continue to expand Squires Landing Park and be complementary to the piece that you just acquired is just fine too. So that's why that would be really appealing here in water access, because it's really a simple test.
And our master plan doesn't really include that property, so is that a problem or not when you're applying?
Say that again?
The master plan for Squires Landing doesn't include that extra property, so is that a problem? Because now we're going away from
No, because our pros plan basically identifies any opportunity for land acquisition along the Sammamish River and or Lake Washington.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councilman Curtis.
So I like the idea of adding the boardwalk, and I'm really not that big of a fan of thinking about the acquisition in beside Squires Landing as a potential for eventually developing a walk along the water, because as I've looked at those properties, I think there's some that either would be exorbitantly expensive or just the likelihood of success is so low it's not worth even starting. So I'd rather take the money and put it on Squires Landing that we own now instead of buying more Squires Landing. So I'm inclined to go with the alternative.
Councilmember Herbig.
On that last line there, park acquisition, phase one development, what percentage of that is theoretical acquisition versus improvements?
It was about 50% split. That was the best guess that we had.
Right. No, I totally understand. You're kind of taking a stab in the dark there. And actually, I tend to agree with Councilmember Curtis on this. We have so many properties that, you know, need some attention and could use some improvements. And I would much rather focus on improving the parks we have, improving log boom, improving rhododendron, improving the many, many, many acres of Squires Landing that we already have in our portfolio, before I'd be interested in taking on, frankly, you know, that property in particular is going to cost us, I think, a lot of money, and I think there's a lot of potential downside to that property. So I'd be more interested in investing in what we already own rather than expanding our portfolio at this time.
Councilmember Smith.
Well, that's pretty much what I was going to say. I think we have plenty of need that we've identified on our existing properties, and especially since this one isn't part of a bond thing. So basically we're putting it at a relatively high priority on this list, and to me it just doesn't seem like it deserves that level of priority. When I look at all the other projects, I would say they all seem to have a lot higher priority than further acquisition.
Anybody else? Oh, Councilmember Spurrier.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm really excited to see the rhododendron boardwalk be in here. That park is so well loved, so well used with all the play equipment and the kids of all ages, and to have it actually a way to connect to the water, I think would be really valuable for the community.
Okay.
Councilmember Danuski.
So if we didn't do the acquisition part, would we still be applying for the grant for the Phase 1 improvement part of that? And then we can get all three of those in under the 1 million?
That's part of the direction that we would be seeking.
That would be possible.
It's possible, I think, with the Phase 1 development. Right now, we just have a concept plan from Coast and Harbour. Remember, they presented to you in December. And that would have to be updated, so it's still at a very conceptual level. So we'd have to figure out what kind of improvements on that property you could do, whether it would be, removing the mobile home, for instance, maybe putting in an additional walkway, putting in a picnic pavilion, to be determined. Those are the kind of things that were on that concept plan.
Yeah, and if I can just kind of reiterate, one of the things that we did as a staff as we were kind of vetting this list was, again, whether we could pay for it without a bond, because that was really critical. So that's why Squires Landing Park was identified as Phase 1, but we really didn't have a good idea with the overall cost for the conceptual plan, how do you slice the pie and still make it fit within what it was that we could afford without a bond. So that exercise hasn't fully taken place yet. So that's why you see the $758,000 versus $483. There's probably a little room in between to be able to deal with that, if that's important to the council to see something move forward with Squires Landing in this grant application cycle.
Sounds good.
And one other thing, too, is that the reason why that's also important is because May 2nd, that's your grant application deadline. So that means a lot of things have to happen pretty quickly in order to realize that aspect of a grant application. The other projects, they're far enough along where there's probably not a lot of extra action that the council needs to take.
Or extra design work and reconfiguration. Debbie and Mark, you're going to show another slide here soon that assumes a bond issue and what our grant matches would be on a bond issue.
Yes, that's the next slide.
Yeah, so one thing you'll see in that one is it shows the St. Edward ball fields under a potential bond issue and what our match would be and what the potential grant would request there. You can see at the bottom of that slide. If you chose for St. Edward Park athletic fields to not be part of the bond issue, then you may also want to think really carefully about whether you would want to come up with city funds to have it still be applied for in this cycle. So if you could go back to the previous slide, let's say that you don't do a park bond, then do you want to include St. Edward ball fields in this application and have it be under the youth athletic fields and the local parks? Thank you. And if you did, would it be just added to this list that you see in front of you, or would you want to take one or two of them out to make room for St. Edward ball fields? And part of this depends on whether you want to do a park bond or not, and if you did, would the ball fields be in that bond? If you knew right now tonight whether the ball fields were going to be in and out of a bond, that would be really helpful to know. Don't know if you know that, but you see where I'm going? The sooner we get direction from you, the sooner we can get going on applying for these grants and write a quality grant.
Couple of things for clarification. Back slide. I thought rhododendron float had already been permitted and ordered because we authorized that 2 years ago.
Yes, you have funded both the rhododendron float and the Squires Landing float. They're fully funded, but we believe, and they're going through design and/or permitting right now. They're not permitted yet, the floats. But we felt that they would score so well that you might as well try to get some state money to help you pay for them. But like I said, you have them fully paid for now in your budget.
The other thing is, okay, next slide. I'm really not in favor of having the athletic fields on the bond issue. I think it's important that we go ahead with those ball fields ourselves, because I would hate to go against the public. If the public turned down and said no, then for us to go ahead and do it, I don't think is right. Councilmember Smith.
I would say that's essentially how I feel about it. I think there's a big plus to putting it on as a ballot measure, but I also think the fear I have is that if it doesn't pass, this is something that we've spent a lot of energy on to try to address over the last 10 years, and it's been funded in one form or another, and it's had RCO grants that couldn't be used, and there is a risk there that if it didn't pass, then do we say we no longer address the issue? And if that's the case, then what do we do? And so I can tell you, I would be very open to removing it from the any potential ballot measure, but I would like to be able to maybe get together with city manager and Joanne or the mayor or anybody else that would want to join us and talk about maybe some ways that maybe we could fund it without going on the ballot.
Councilmember Herbig.
I'm open to the idea of not having the athletic fields on a ballot measure, but I think that would be a conversation that would be good for maybe a work session or something if we want to talk about other ways to get around to funding it rather than having 2 or 3 folks meet privately. I think it'd be better to have a public discussion about that.
Can I just add one thing? I agree with you. I was going on what our city manager said, where he needed to know as soon as possible, and that's the only reason I was trying to do something quickly so that we could at least come up with a potential option that as a council we could consider. But I do agree that a study session would be fantastic if time permits.
Councilmember Zanuski.
Couple things. If we didn't put the athletic fields on the bond measure, would we have enough matching to have it on the list this year?
That's a question the city manager can
Yes.
probably answer.
You do, as a city, have cash in the bank. This might be an opportunity where you want to dip into strategic opportunities or dip further into your REIT account or park impact fee account. What I'd like to do is see what we can put together over the next few days and see what our local match could look like and where that money would come from on ball fields, and get back to you on that.
There's a number of sources where money could come from, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, it's hard to have this conversation without having next week's conversation with the chicken and the egg kind of a problem. I'm not necessarily against one thing or another yet. It's just hard to have both, and then to also think about the operational money that's needed for all of these is something that's not really included that needs to be talked about.
And I don't think we have to have your direction tonight, but what we wanted to do is give you context tonight in preparation for next Monday's conversation, and then perhaps you could give us direction on these grants next week. Is that okay?
Yeah. Councilmember Curtis?
So in general, I really like the previous page group of items without, this group without the bond. So these could be going independently, and if they happened, we'd all be really happy with whichever ones we got. We can fund them, and then let the Imagine Kenmore work itself out with either more water or more sidewalks, and keep that as a separate issue.
I think the only piece that we'd be looking for direction on next week then would be for Squires Landing, whether you would want to include any kind of development as a phase to go along with the Squires Landing float. And whether you'd want to apply for the ball fields. Those seem to be the two outstanding questions for direction on a 2016 grant strategy.
If I still have the mic, I'd be inclined to say no on both of those.
Councilmember Herbig.
Kind of going back to the discussion of theoreticals, if we go forward with a parks bond measure, I would be, again, kind of going back to what I said previously, I think I would be more inclined to support going forward with something that does include acquisition in Squires. I just think it's a bit of a liability at this point. So I'd be more interested in, again, investing in what we already have.
Councilmember Danuski.
For Squires, my preferences are the float, and then removing the house and getting some kind of either restrooms or picnic shelter would be my top things for Squires.
Okay.
I don't want to see that lagoon in Squires.
What's that?
Anybody else? No? Where's that? You got what you need?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Rob, you mind if I take a couple minutes?
This is getting exciting now.
As many of you may or may not know, next Tuesday will be my last day here with the city of Kenmore. And I just wanted to take a few minutes here, and Debbie didn't know I was going to say this anyway. But first of all, actually, I started in Parks and Recreation in 1977. So I've almost been at this 40 years. So that's a long time. So I've seen a lot. But what I wanted to say to all of you, that it's been an honor and it's been fun.
Good.
To work with all of you on the council and the staff of Kenmore, and also this community. I think it's remarkable, and I think all of us in this room are fortunate that the people of Kenmore are as engaged as they are in determining the future of their community. If I can give you as a council some props, is that I think the community is, they should be very, very proud of the ability of this council to stay the course. I don't think that's something that can be said about a lot of councils in and around the area, where they're working with the community on a vision, and they've decided to stick with it, even when it gets tough. You've done that. And I think that just in the short 3 years that I've been able to enjoy Kenmore, I think the fruits of that labor are obvious. So keep it up, that thing that you're doing. And I can't say enough for the people that I've had the pleasure to work with here in Kenmore, because I didn't know any of them before I came here, with the exception of Mr. Carlindsey, and thank you for the opportunity. But you've got a great staff, and so I've had a great time. I'm going to miss being here, but I bet you every time I drive through, something's going to be different. And I think that's a testament for what you've done. So thank you.
Your Honor, can I just add to that really quick? Yeah, so I want to thank you, Mark, for what you've done for us in the last couple of years. How many years? 2, 3 years? Yeah. So Mark and I knew each other in Gig Harbor. He was my counterpart in Gig Harbor for the Penn Met Park District. It covered the entire Gig Harbor Peninsula, and it was about 50,000 people. And he did phenomenal things there. It was just amazing what he accomplished. And before that, he'd been in Port Angeles, and then before that, you were 20 years or so for Kirkland. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of what you see in Kirkland, Mark had something to do with. And so he came to us with a really great resume, and we yanked him out of retirement. He retired from Penn Met right about the same time I came to Kenmore. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, a little before. But so you retired from Penn Met, and then we asked you to come out of retirement to give us a hand, because we knew you had all that experience, and and you knew how to get things done, and I had proof that you knew how to get things done because I witnessed it in Gig Harbor. So thank you for helping us get a new pros plan and for applying for grants and getting projects built, the skate park, for example. So thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you. Really good job. Thank you. All right. Next item, Transportation 2016 Grant Strategy. Mrs. Overleaf, Public Works and Director and City Engineer.
All by myself. Just a minute, please, to find my map. Debbie, is this your laptop? Eddie, help.
Oh.
Oh, that you need this, is it fill out?
Oh. No, this is my mouse. No, there's no picture.
We got it.
This is a different machine.
Yeah, we got a
Oh,
picture.
you have the picture? Oh.
We got a picture here.
That's weird.
Huh?
Is it this? Maybe it's
No.
this. We were having trouble with this.
Right
before.
down the
Take
street.
this out.
When you gotta have a tooth pulled, you gotta have a tooth pulled.
Did you just restart it? I don't know
Huh?
what the login is.
Can you smile?
Because mine wasn't working either. It did the same thing. Mayor?
How? Well, that's peculiar.
They need help? No, the one I got right here.
But it also put 8 also.
Black screen too.
So I only have a little section. Anyway, I'll ask.
What did we do
I'm
last time?
confused.
We did functions, we did that.
So why do you need it 7 only here? Why do you need 7 from here to here as well?
You guys got a
What's
mouse,
different
right?
about 7? Do you know?
Something's going on that screen.
We lost our picture over here.
You lost it?
Yeah, we lost it. Oh, you got it.
Okay. Put it back?
Is the design different from here to here?
That's right.
Because you're going for both.
Yeah,
What happens if you
do
do
now?
both, I guess?
No, you broke it.
That's what it keeps doing. It keeps
fine.
flashing the screen and then it goes away.
Is that you could win both and use one for another
Computer
one.
is this?
This is Mark's. You got a
thought that was an
PowerPoint
easy
you want to run?
No, I
I
just
thought
have
that was
the
an
map.
easy question.
There you
I
go.
thought that was an easy, quick question that I was asking.
Okay, now.
Almost.
How did we get that up last time?
You did it. But this is a different machine. It has the same problem. So I don't think it's the laptop. I think it's maybe that cord. Take that cord out.
You'll get a picture. There you go.
Oh,
There you go there. Wait.
okay.
Yeah, I was curious why there was overlap.
We don't want projector only. We want duplicate.
You can use one to
There.
Okay.
Okay, what's
Don't
the,
touch anything.
What's the line?
Do we know what the password is for this?
Yes.
okay, great.
Yay.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
here's your thing right here. Thank you.
Okay, I think crisis averted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
I took a slightly different approach to my presentation. I have a big map. I don't have a PowerPoint. Sorry if that's a disappointment.
Get enough of those every day.
All right, well, I don't know how to fit it to screen, but we're going to go ahead and get going. This map is in your packet.
You doubt it?
Yeehaw. Thank you. Patty, you want to stay here?
Yeah, do.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Crystal Release, your Public Works Director, and tonight I'd like to talk to you about potential grant applications for transportation. And what I thought I would do is I'm going to follow the council report pretty closely, but I thought I'd kind of highlight the grants that we have now and the work that we're going to build over the next couple of years based on those grants, and then get into some ideas and recommendations. And similar to what Debbie said, when we look at things and ideas of things to apply for, we use our knowledge of those grant programs and we try to fit projects that we think will be successful. Unfortunately, the things we pick to apply for aren't always the first thing we'd like to build if we had unlimited resources. So what we have listed is based on a conversation with funding partners, with our engineering team, and also the city manager's office. So that's kind of where our recommendations ultimately did come from. So let's start with showing you what we have going on. Patty, is it possible to make the light on the screen not as bright? I'm having a hard time seeing it. Thank you. So the first project we had on our list was the 202nd Safe Routes to Schools program. That's a huge grant that we got to do sidewalk along 202nd. Then it's on the south side, and then on each side of 66th up by Kenmore Junior High, which is right here. And we've applied for Safe Routes to Schools money since I've been here almost 4 years. And this is the first time since I've been here that we got a Safe Routes to School grant. I'm sure we've had others. I'm just not aware. And this is the first time also in my experience applying for grant money where we made an application, and it's a state program. It's money that's filtered down through the Washington State DOT. They said, well, we think you should add a little more sidewalk and just tell us how much that's going to cost. So it's first time mid-grant where they came back and said, we think you should do more, up your budget, and resubmit it, and then we got it. So that was pretty awesome. We expect this to finish design this year and to go to construction in 2017, and we'll do it in the summer when the kids are out of school. And I've been working with our team. John Vicente is our project manager, and it's like fun. We're by a school, so we actually had a team meeting about what fun things we could maybe do, safe but fun for students. And John will also be reaching out to the school with some of our ideas. Fun things like we're using school colors somehow, maybe using their logo, things that we can fit within our budget, but that we think will be different. So that's the first grant. 62nd Avenue was the Highway Safety Improvement Program. And I should back up. Safe Routes to Schools has a funding cycle this year. They're every other year, so this is a Safe Routes to School year. Our 62nd Avenue sidewalk is picking up where the 522 project is leaving off, and it's going up the east side of 62nd to 187th. Now, John was just here with a project update on that, so we just talked about that project. We had very little money of our own. This was I think we applied for 5 grants 2 years ago and did very, very well, so we put a very little tiny amount of match on that project. I think it was like 10 grand, and we got it. Same thing. Design this year, construction next year. I am not aware that there's an HSIP, Highway Safety Improvement Grant Program, this year. That's why you didn't see it on a list of recommendations. But if it pops up, we'll certainly look at it. So 181st Street, between 68th and 73rd here. I'm going to talk about 3 grants at once. On the south side, we have a community development block grant. We have transportation alternatives money. And then on the north side, in the same project limits, we have a transportation improvement board grant. Now, CDBG is coming around this year, but because we got such a large award last year, and they do spread it around, that we've agreed we're not going to, we're proposing we don't apply for another CDBG grant this year. And Transportation Alternatives Program, the TAP, is not offering a program that we're aware of this year. And then on the north side of the street, the Transportation Improvement Board, TIB, they do have a funding cycle every year. They're the program that has a cycle every year. I think it's the easiest money to spend around. The one catch about TIB money is they will only give you money if you construct the project. They won't give you design money. They will not give you just right-of-way acquisition money. They like to give you money to get stuff built. Let's see. You know about the bridge, our West Sammamish River Bridge. We've got $12 million from the Bridge Rehabilitation Program, that BRAC, and then $8 million in the state transportation package, which is super great. That project's under design. And my understanding is they're not offering a BRAC program this year. We do have that our eye on the BRAC program for the Swamp Creek Bridge on 175th Street that we're evaluating right now. So we'll keep our eye on that program for that older structure on 175th. I think you know, did you?
Is that the one where it's like a private road? It's right one block off of the highway? Or I'm totally off on that one.
Well, it's in the right of way, so it's ours, and it's on 175th Street. It's just south of the brand new bridge on 522 over Swamp Creek. Yeah,
thank you.
It's 2 lanes right now. You know about 522 West A. We have a lot of TIB money in that program, and we also have some surface water money, and we also got federal aid through the Puget Sound Regional Council process. And the last thing I would mention is we had that overlay money on Simons, and it's from 68th kind of around the corner, so that overlay is going to happen this year, and that's federal aid through the federal aid process. So we have a lot of work going on for grants. We were just incredibly successful 2 years ago, which is really fun, gave us a lot of work to do. You will see some construction on 181st this year on the south side, then the north side next year. So I guess I kind of quickly went through the different grant programs as they relate to the work we have going on right now. Do you have any questions about the different programs before I kind of jump into ideas for applications this year?
Questions? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I don't know whether we discussed it, but the TAC for ETP is due to meet here this month and come up with recommendations that ETP, skateboard, and seashore will make judgments on, and go back to PSRC for federal money. And I'm not sure what that pot of money is, and do we have anything that we could use some of that money for? Are we contemplating asking for anything in this way?
So I'll talk a minute maybe about the federal aid. So every other year, federal aid comes through the Puget Sound Regional Council, and that's where we had received a lot of our 522 money. So when Puget Sound Regional Council, Eastside Transportation Partnership are talking about bringing staff back together, what that group is doing is looking for about, I think it's 5 regionally significant projects that they can elevate to a regional competition. And I know we were picked for the bridge 2 years ago and forwarded to the regional competition where we did not do well. But that's what that conversation is about. And I see the 522s competing really well regionally. I would talk to the TAC and the ETP about Juanita, but I don't know if that's regionally significant enough. They usually have large projects like 522 that are, multimodal, pretty big projects, interchanges type stuff.
Or
But if I were
overpasses.
to talk to that group about any of our projects that we have, I would propose and recommend that it be Juanita Avenue.
Okay.
So the federal aid money that comes through, they have projects. They can do ped bike improvements. They can do projects like 522, and they also have an air quality program. And in the past, that used to pay for sidewalks and trails, but it's for air quality improvements, and they've decided that kind of that type of work really isn't providing the benefit that they really need to have for air quality improvement. So those are no longer going to rate very well, which is unfortunate.
I know the overpasses down in Bellevue were projects that were funded in these ways. There was a trail project in Issaquah at one time that was funded through PSRC funds. So a variety of different things. I think the bridge was not funded not because it wasn't a worthwhile thing, and we were all kind of stunned that it was the top priority from ETP, yet wasn't considered by PSRC. And I think the reason was that it wasn't a new project. It was a maintenance and repair kind of a thing of an existing bridge that was there.
Yeah, while they say that bridges were eligible, at the end of the day, behind the scenes, nobody was going to give a bridge money that we learned that hadn't received BRAC money yet. I think if we hadn't received the $8 million for the transportation package, we would go back and ask for more money. But since, based on what we know today, we're fully funded on the bridge, I wouldn't recommend applying for any more bridge money right now.
Maybe someday, maybe the next time around, if we are farther along in our plans for cross-town, across 522 communication, either a tunnel underneath or bypass over above, that might fare well with us in time. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe. I don't know. Okay. So let's talk about the Safe Routes to Schools program first. We actually Brett and I met with their staff and looked at our city, and they had a bunch of different ideas for us, and we came up with a whole list of what we think might be eligible. And let's see, where did I put my list? There we go. And I have costs for these in your attachment A. So I'll walk through all the Safe Routes to Schools ideas. And Rob and I were talking, and since there's no dollar value restriction and there's no maximum number you can apply for, and I like that Debbie said, each grant costs us time and money to put together. So my recommendation is not applying for 5. 4 still sounds like a lot. 3 sounds like a lot, but more manageable. So I recommend applying for between 1 and 3 Safe Routes to Schools projects. So the first one on the list was 155th Street, 84th to Simons. So that's down here, and that's project number 1. We did put a number by all of these. We've applied for this with the Safe Routes to Schools program twice and haven't gotten it, and I'm not willing to give up on it yet. We talked to them in the past. We've only applied on the north side of the street, and they said, well, why didn't you apply for both sides of the street? Now, the good news, Morelands is here, Inglemoor High School is right here. Development on the north side has completed a lot of the sidewalk out there. We actually spent some of our own resources and filled in a gap project on the south side closer to the high school this last summer. So I felt like I'd like to maybe try for that grant again and then have continuous sidewalk on both sides of the street, but also to maybe put an RRFB or some improved crossing mid-block for kids as well. So that's project idea number 1. Project idea number 2 is all the way up here back by Kenmore Junior High. And that project, I'm proposing, it's a continuation of the Safe Routes to Schools grant we have now, but do the north side of the street and go to the first side street. What did I put down here as limits? That would be 63rd. So it's not a very long section, but I think it's still valuable given the rural kind of feel of the neighborhood up there. So that was...
And Chris, you're taking it to that side street because right after that there's some new sidewalks from a new development, right?
Yeah, I don't think it'll get you all the way to that corner. It's all the way around the corner when where the development puts sidewalks in on the kind of east side up in here. So there'll still be a gap, but we're closing in on that gap. Okay, the third idea is Arrowhead Drive, which is down here by the school. And as you all know, there's no sidewalk on either side, and then around the curve is protected by curbing. So we would propose putting sidewalk on the west side up through the corner radius. There's a pretty wide shoulder along Arrowhead in this area, but I think all the way through here really could benefit from sidewalk. So that's idea number 3. Idea number 4 is right across the street, and I've actually reached out to the Safe Routes to Schools people saying, hey, could we make this one grant application instead of maybe 2? And I haven't heard. I need to provide them a little more information. So they did respond, but we haven't figured that out yet. So there's potential this could be one grant application, but they're separated by Juanita, so to me they feel discreetly separate, but it's worth asking. So project number 4 is 153rd Street on the south side. Our city manager points out, I think his family walks through there to get to school, and there's sidewalk on the north side, but the kids are using the shoulder on the south side. So we're proposing a short piece from Juanita to 70th Avenue.
You do get a wave of kids using that south side shoulder. Like Chris just said, there's sidewalk on the north side, but the way kids come home, there's really not a good reason for them to cross the street twice just to use the sidewalk. And just for the record, my kids will be graduated from that elementary school by the time this grant got built, and so I have no interest personally in getting this thing built.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes. And the last Safe Routes to Schools idea is on Simons, and it's from 84th to 157th, and there's the development going in on the east side right here, putting in a piece of sidewalk. Now, it is within the limits. I think the Safe Routes to Schools within a mile of a school. The east side has a curb right now, and it has kind of I would call it a cattle trail. I mean, you can walk through there. Brett's going to work with the neighbors to do some vegetation trimming. And there is sidewalk on the other side, continuous, but there's also quite a bit of development happening on the east side. So what I did different on this project when I was doing cost estimating, if you look way at the end of the spreadsheet, I put 500, there's a 500, 600, 550, that's all dollars a linear foot that I used for a very high level estimate. And I put a $250 linear foot on that 84th to 157th just to acknowledge that the curb's there. We all know it's not the sidewalk that's an expensive part, it's all the drainage work and walls that we have to do with these types of projects. So 250 might even be high.
Yeah. Councilmember,
Isn't there already some sidewalk going in on that east side, though, in that segment you're looking at?
That's why I said on the corner, there's a development going in. So you have a little bit of sidewalk going in on the east side, kind of from that side street north. So maybe...
Okay, maybe I'm misremembering, but I remember walking from 84th down, and there was a new development going kind of where the number 5 is right there. And I seem to remember there was I saw the forms and being laid out for sidewalk, through part of that area.
Yeah, I think it's further on the...
east side or west side?
I think it is right by where 84th is. I
just remember being south and on the east side because I remember I met the neighbor over on 84th, north of Simons.
Yeah, we've got 2 lines in here. It's number 6 is for the overlay program. Number 5,
right.
Actually, it's even hard for me to see. It's a shorter line. It kind of starts here at 84th.
Yeah,
and then
no,
it goes
I'm
down
just
to 157th. So you're right, kind of right in here.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident there's some new sidewalk kind of going in right where that number 5 would be. Okay.
You are correct.
Okay.
So those were 5 ideas for the Safe Routes to Schools program that we came up with, that we thought, we didn't recommend anything here that we didn't think would be competitive. And because there's no It's an interesting program. No match is required, no city match, but they say, what was the language? Grant match would, they'd like to see a grant match, but they don't give any guidance on how much you need to provide to get preferential treatment, I guess. There's some grant programs that tell you exactly how many points you get on the application based on how much match you have, and that's not the case here. So when I ran my numbers, I assumed a 10% city match. So it's something, but it's not a very large amount.
Councilmember Herbig.
Did we ever consider going after Safe Routes funding for the toll trail?
Well, the toll trail is being built this summer.
I know. I was just wondering if that was something we thought of did we ever think of that for Safe Routes? I mean, it is going almost directly to a elementary school.
Not my team.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know if it was on anybody else's radar, but it wasn't on mine.
Okay, fair enough. No worries.
There was parks money that went to that, or levy funding.
Trail money.
So,
King County Trail.
King County Trails.
Okay.
So I'm glad to see that we are continuing with Safe Routes to School, because that's been a priority here in the city almost since its founding. So I'm glad to see that you are filling in those areas. Councilmember Danuski.
Couple things. First, did we reach out to the school district at all to see if any of these are a higher priority for them?
Nope.
Okay. Second, number 2, did you say it was going to be on the north side where the other project's going to be on the south side?
Yes. We thought in the previous application, we took advantage of the fact that there was already some sidewalk built on the south side, and we thought that at the intersection of 66 would be a good place to change to the north side of the street, because we know some kids will use that sidewalk and then enter the school through the ball field. Some might go to the corner, and we also know that around the corner, kind of up in here, there's quite a bit of sidewalk built on the north side. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about, should we stay on the same side of the street? But we thought because the school was on the north side and there's other sidewalk on that side, that we would have a transition point there.
And did you think of in front of the school itself, the road in front of the school, the road in front of the school itself as a very weird patchwork of little bits of sidewalks here and there? Did you look at that at all for this?
No.
Okay.
Our focus has been 202nd and getting kids to the school. We didn't look on the other side of the school.
Okay.
Councilmember Curtis.
So of these projects, I think probably in my mind number 3 is the most important, because we hear the most concerns from the neighborhoods and the citizens. A comment on number 2, to put it on the south side, another issue with that was it's pretty close to the stream, because that's where our property is, and it would be really difficult to build there, to put a sidewalk in. So I think on the north side is better there. To me, that would be one of the least important, because I don't hear a lot of citizens talking about it, and I don't think a lot of people walk from the area west of there along there. So I'd probably put that low on my list. So 3 and then number 1 would be the 2 that I would rate the highest. So if we want to sort of have a limited group out of those 5, those would be my priorities.
Your Honor, is that what we're doing now? Do we want to get your direction on which 3 of the 5?
I do like the idea of getting guidance on this program before we move to a different one.
Deputy Mayor, I'm not seeing hands, that's why I'm, okay.
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you were suggesting that we apply for all 5 of these, or do you want to just jump down to 3 and concentrate on 3, or see what the powers that be think of these 5 and see what we do get funded?
I thought we were also going for possible bond.
Possibly, yeah. But this Safe Routes to School grant programs that she's talking about here, and all these qualify.
I think all of these 5 would be competitive and eligible. My recommendation is that we apply for 3 or less.
Oh, really? Okay. That's that. Okay. So you
But
want us
that's
to
not
pick
based.
You
But
want
that's
us
not
to pick
based
the
on
3?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's not based on a rule. That's based on
Our capacity to do it.
match capacity.
Match capacity and staff capacity.
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I would have, my top three would have been actually 1, 2, and 3, but I don't live up by 202nd. I just look at it from being a street I wouldn't want to walk on. And so I don't know how high of a priority it is, but from a street that looks like it needs a sidewalk, it would appear to be high priority to me, but I don't live up that area.
Councilmember Sperry.
I was actually directing your attention at the other end of the dais.
Councilmember Danuski.
Just anecdotally, it's hard when you live in one area and not the other to figure out which one's more important because you don't live in the other area. I do know a couple people that live basically right under that number 2 that their parents won't let them walk on that road, so they actually go up through driveways to the upper neighborhood and cheat and get on a different bus. So that's just one anecdotal for that one, but it's.
I would agree. It's not
areas.
safe. That's absolutely true. It's just how many people
Exactly.
use it.
It's not many.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a hard time picking because I don't know the other neighborhoods quite as well.
I guess I'm leaning to 3 and 4 because I've heard about them for a number of years. And 3 and 4 is where I'm at. Councilmember Herbig.
In the grand scheme of things, it'd be easier to make these decisions if the maps also showed where existing sidewalks were, so we could kind of picture how they all connect to our current network. I lean towards 3, 2, and 1, I think. 3, I think, is probably more pressing than 4 if I had to pick between the two of them. And I think, eventually we need to get 68th and 202nd paved all the way up to 61st, and I think that's an important segment to take care of. It leaves a relatively small gap that we might be able to take care of ourselves at some point. I mean, it's just 2 lots, Frank. I'm looking at a map right now. It's 2 lots left. Big lots, but 2 lots that maybe 3, that we would need to do on our own at some point to connect everything. So that's where I'm leaning. It's hard for me to look at this and kind of picture how, I can't picture how sidewalked or unsidewalked 155th is at that end of the street off the top of my head right now. So I'm just kind of guessing. But I do think the first segment's important. I do think 3 is really important. I think 2 would be an important investment.
See, I know that number 4, there's a bus stop right there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, where the number 4 sign is. And I do see kids there quite often. And there is no sidewalk there. And you're right, it's on the other side of the street. And so that's why I was picking 4. But anyway, Councilmember Curtis.
I'd be happy to switch my votes to 2, 3, and 4.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'll go with 2, 3, and 4 as well.
Clear as mud?
2, 3, and 4. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay. That's on, okay, safe routes to schools, okay.
Yep. And is council comfortable with around a 10% match? It's hard to apply for these grants when you have 0% design.
No.
And so we're going to be very, very, very conservative on these.
Does any of this change if Safe Routes comes back and says, yeah, we can do 3 and 4 together? Do we then look at this a second time?
I think that package just gets really big, and our match would be still the same. So whether it's...
I was trying to figure out if your worry was about the size of the match or just the number of applications.
I think at that point you're doing kind of 2 discrete segments of sidewalk. You're just doing it under one package. And I wouldn't combine them if they didn't think they were both great. So you don't want to tank one of them because the other didn't do well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll go for around 10% match, and my cost estimates were solely based on a linear foot of sidewalk costs, so we'll create cost estimates and go from there. Okay, super.
Question.
Yes.
Unrelated. CDBG.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got the 181st Street that's on CDBG. Do we have anything else on CDBG that funds were used for in the past 3-4 years, whatever?
No,
That's
just
it.
the big, yeah.
Okay, so that's the one that we can brag about, being able to use that money in Kenmore.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
And that was from an award or program that was advertised 2 years ago, but the money came through late last year, or later than they thought last year.
But that's fine. I mean, that's a project that we are getting underway and whatever. Councilmember Daniski.
Okay, one last question. If we decide to do bond measure for 68th, does that take 2 out of the mix? Or do we just kind of use that as matching, or how would we need to pick another one, I guess?
I don't, when we apply for, Rob, would you like to answer?
Well, you go ahead.
I was going to say that when we apply for all of these projects, we have to commit that we have the money in hand. So we'll be applying for this money and may not even find out about the grant until after this fall. So if we did get a grant for number 2 and we did get additional money for 68th, we could certainly use city money as a match. I certainly wouldn't give the grant back. I think we'll have to have a conversation with council for any funding package that we might take to the voters to talk about, what's the plan if a project comes in under cost, or, kind of what's the list of things that we could work on.
And if I could add to that, my recommendation is to, if you go for a bond, assume no grants. And then if you get grants, that's great. You can do several things with that. You can pay off your bonds early or issue less bonds and therefore tax your citizens less, or you can enhance your projects, maybe make wider sidewalks with that grant or with the extra funds, or you can, and we're likely going to have project overages, and so we'll be able to, have money to spend on project overages. So my recommendation is to, if you're going to issue bond, if you're going to go for a voter approved bond, assume you have no grants, and then still apply for grants. I mean, assume you have no grants when you go to the voters, but if you get grants, that'll be icing on the cake.
Councilmember Herwig.
Kind of building off that, actually, I would propose, and we can discuss this later, but I would propose that if we end up with money left over, if we go forward with the bond measure and we come in under or we get grant money, I would propose we then start ticking down through the unfunded projects from the neighborhood transportation plans we've been working on, because we're going to have projects that aren't paid for, and we'll have them fairly well priced out or estimated at some point. So that would give us a really easy set of fixes that we can keep doing and sprinkle it throughout the city also.
Okay. So the next program I'd like to talk about is the Washington State DOT Pedestrian and Bicycle Program. And I happen to put here they have $18.4 million statewide, and this is it's administered through the same group that does the Safe Routes to Schools program. And again, no match required, preferred, they say. And I'm recommending that we apply for 2 projects as part of that program. And one of them is applying for 522 crossing evaluation. This is something that's in our transportation element of the comp plan, to do a study between 61st and 68th to see, is it an overpass, is it an underpass? I think we need an additional, at least a ped bike crossing, if not a multimodal crossing. And so we estimated that's about a $300,000 project. If we put in a 10% match, that's about $30,000. And even though we've done huge improvements to 522, that's a stretch that still needs some pedestrian bicycle help. So I'd recommend that we apply for a study, and this program will pay for a study. Not a lot of grant programs will, so I think it's specifically a good fit for this program. And then the second project is applying for money for Juanita Avenue When these folks came in to talk to Brett and me, we talked about Juanita and different types of accidents. And I think that, unfortunately, this program really isn't big enough to give us enough money to attack all of Juanita for design work. So I would recommend the piece between 170th and 160th to do design work. And that's about $650,000. And if we paid 10%, that'd be $65,000. I think that'll be a competitive ask. I know that Juanita is on the state's radar as far as, and we also know that Kirkland is doing work on their portion of Juanita, so it's a continuity of work, and I think this is a good step for us to start working on Juanita. So those are and just to let you know, 2 years ago we applied for a ped bike program to do sidewalk along Rhododendron Park on Juanita and didn't get it. We don't have an accident history there. This program really is looking for areas where we have an accident history.
Councilmember Smith.
I like both the programs. I have a question on the Juanita one. Does any of there was a study that was, actually I don't know what all it was completed on Juanita. It was millions of dollars to basically improve Juanita and make it safer for bicyclists and pedestrians. Is any of that relevant in this design, or was that just a study that said here's what it would take to improve that corridor?
So you did the Juanita study before I was here, so prior to
It was
May.
before me too.
Yeah, and my understanding and what I've seen in that study is it was an evaluation of the corridor to decide what improvements, and the decision, as I understand it, was to put sidewalk on the east side only, given the golf course on the west side. And so our cost estimates, that's what they're based on, sidewalk on the east side. And I also would like to get a nice buffered bike lane if we can, which means we probably can't save any of the sidewalk that's out there. It's probably going to be a redo of that east side.
Okay, thank you.
But it's still, so it's sidewalk, bike lane, car lane, bike lane. We would assume that all PEDs would use the east side, but then we'll also be wanting to build additional pedestrian crossings. Okay, awesome. So I am hearing thumbs up to both those apps, which is great. The federal aid process, which we talked about a little bit, Juanita, I think if we were to ask for design money for the whole length, which is about 7,500 linear feet, I think that's a good ask for that program. So our total estimate for design for all of Juanita, that's 170th South, is about $2.3 million. And I think that's a reasonable ask for the federal aid process. And the match is 13.5%. That's our standard federal match rate. And then the second project is Simons, continuing what we started. We got a big chunk of money for Simons overlay 2 years ago when we applied. So we would pick up where we left off on Simons, which is going to be at 165th. And then we're proposing about another 10 blocks of overlay. What's awesome about the program is that we actually benefit from taking such great care of our system. You get more points when you apply if you have a higher overall sufficiency rating of your pavement, which we do. So we've been rewarded in the past in getting money because of our previous work and commitment, which is really great. So those are the two federal aid projects that I'm recommending. Now back to Deputy Mayor Van Ness's question. There's regional money we can apply for, and then there's King County money at the federal aid world. And I don't know if Juanita design would rise to the level of being regionally competitive. I kind of doubt it. It doesn't mean that we can't have the conversation and try. But it wouldn't just be, it'd be sidewalk and bicycle improvements, which we all know are very much needed. And that overlay is not a regional program. That's just within the King County area.
Help me understand Juanita, because we had a study done 2007, 6, somewhere in there. that where we were looking at, you're not talking about any increased lane width here. You're only talking sidewalk on one side of the street, right?
We're talking about one lane in each direction still. The future of Juanita is still one lane in each direction. You'll have flare out at intersections so you can get in a left turn pocket. You'll increase capacity of the roadway if you can get folks turning left where it's needed out of the way. So you'll have one lane in each direction, left turn pockets, and then improve ped bike facilities.
And your total cost is 2.3 million for that entire length?
Yep.
That's design.
That's design.
Design.
Design
Okay,
only.
Fine. Because I was going to say, I would have sworn that was up closer to 20 million.
Well, and this is a roadway where I wouldn't even be comfortable asking for, in the federal aid, they've changed the rules, so it's called, kind of a design plus one, so you can apply for design plus right-of-way, you can apply for right-of-way money and construction. You can't apply for design, right-of-way, and construction, and this is a more recent change. I'm not even comfortable estimating what right-of-way costs could be at this point because we have 0% design done. So to me, a chunk of money to start to do design seems prudent, a good step.
I guess I'm not necessarily objecting to it. It's just we spend this much money to design it. What are we going to do? Are we going to then go and build, and then by the time we finally get to where we want to start construction, do we got to go back to design? We saw that happen on 522, where we had one engineering company, we had to get rid of them and go with another one, and a lot of it had to be done again. So,
well, how I feel about Juanita is how I felt about 522 and other, significantly, very expensive projects, and to me that's, 10 to $20 million total, is that we can't afford to, do it all at once. And so we're going to be building pieces of Juanita likely as we did pieces of 522. So we are looking at, if we apply for design money now, in 2 years, we can apply for 1 or 2 segments of right-of-way and construction. So this is every other year, or looking for money wherever we can get it to do segments.
Well, that's the fun part.
Yep.
I just want to make sure we can utilize the design, because I love going out looking for money. So, I'm being very serious.
Yep.
We've been very successful.
Yeah. Well,
and I love doing it. I just want to make sure that we don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel again.
Well, our reinventing the wheel wasn't based on grants.
No. Yes, Chris will be watching them.
They were watched before. And you did have multiple teams working on 522 because of its length and its cost.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but Juanita's pretty long too.
To me, that's logistics of how we do it. Okay. But unless we get some design money, we're not doing anything.
Okay. Fine. No, I think we have to continue to move forward. And I think this is as good a project as any. And it's certainly needed.
Yeah. And again, this was very high, very kind of looking at it for the sake of coming to have this conversation. But when we put the grant package together, we'll look at, the numbers really hard. Design costs are based on a percentage of construction. So what we do is we try to estimate construction first, and then we pick a percentage, whether it's 15 or 20% is typical.
I remember at one point we looked at approaching the state and looking at making that a continuation of 104. Is there any advantage in trying to get the state to say, okay, that's a state highway?
Well, then the state would control it, its channelization, its signing, its speed limit. I know jurisdictions going the other way.
Okay, I'm just...
Well, then they'd want to treat it...
We talked about it at one time.
And then they'd probably want to treat it like a highway, which would be a little detrimental to, vulnerable users.
They don't have the money to make it a highway.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think based on what council had decided before, we're not adding vehicle capacity to Juanita.
Right.
we're adding pedestrian, bicycle
Right.
capacity and level of service.
And there's no intention of adding capacity, vehicle capacity. Fine.
Citizens, I think we do need it.
I'll just fill up.
You need some thumbs up.
Do you need thumbs up?
Okay, awesome. I did want to talk about the Transportation Improvement Board, or the TIB program. That's the program offered every year. It's great money. It doesn't require the federal aid rules and book that comes with federal aid. We have been very successful with TIB in the past. They have been very generous partners on the 522 project. When we were going to award, they gave us even more money. We did apply for one project last year, which was the roundabout at 61st and 193rd, and did not get that. Rob and I talked, and we are not recommending a TIB application this year. Again, they require construction, so we don't have any projects in design to apply. The one project we had talked to council about last year but didn't apply was sidewalk along 181st, kind of from the post office down to 65th and then down along the bank to 522. That actually it's eligible for TIB money, but it's a pretty expensive project, and council at that time, we had talked about undergrounding of utilities. So our costs are pretty high, even if you don't want to underground. They're about $1 million.
Maybe you're about to say this, but TIB came out and walked around and drove around with you last year, and they actually looked at this project and thought it was a good one. So the one thing I'm kind of hesitant about it is what it would be doing is in a lot, if not all, the portions of it would be replacing existing sidewalk. It's really super substandard sidewalk, but there is sidewalk there. So, and given the fact that you would probably want to underground, and that would be another $500,000, we're recommending not moving forward with it. But again, this is your call.
They do like to build sidewalks downtown. They paid for the sidewalk along Murphy's, and then they're paying for the north side of 181st here, so they like investing in our downtown.
Councilmember Curtis.
Is this project number 10 that you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess I'm inclined to not do it at this point, thinking that at some point we want to look at, either a road underneath there or other things that overpasses, underpasses. So that area could get really busy, and I'd hate to do something that might be better incorporated with a later project. So I'm inclined to just wait on that one and do it in due time.
Councilmember Herbig.
Yeah, if we were going to do that project, I would really want to do it with, I'd want to do it right, and I'd want to do it with undergrounding, so I'm not really comfortable scooting forward until we have the money put together for that, so.
But I do believe that either next year or the year after, we are going to be applying for big money with TIB, because we'll know more about the Lake Point project and its needs, and we'll also know where we sit on the West Sammamish River Bridge. And so even though we're not applying this year, I think in the next year or two, we'll be coming to TIB with some big asks. When we got the 522 money for a little over $5 million of TIB, we were the largest award in the state for that TIB grant. I was looking at the TIB grant awards this go around, and there were some even larger ones awarded in this grant cycle, including Gig Harbor got like an $8 or $9 million TIB grant for Harbor Hill Drive extension. So it is possible to go after some pretty big money from TIB.
I think TIB would be a great funding source for Juanita. And they also told us once the Town Green project and all the work on 68th was done on the west side, kind of up to the condos, that they thought it would be a TIB kind of competitive project to continue sidewalk up that west side.
So right now there's kind of a lull in TIB grants that we might want to apply for, but in the next year or two with Juanita, the bridge, Lake Point, there'll be no shortage of TIB applications.
Okay.
Okay, no TIB, we're good.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank
Good.
you very much for your guidance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Spence. City Manager, staff report.
I have nothing.
Wow. Okay, let's go. Yeah, let's. Comments, reports, initiatives. Councilmember Smith.
Didn't write it down, and I can't remember what I was going to say.
Okay, fine.
So, nothing to add.
Councilmember Danuski.
I have to just give a shout out to Mayor Baker for going above and beyond, helping our citizens this week. You know, the family that we've been helping with the immigration issue also has a lack of funding for daycare. So guess who's watching their kids 6 a.m. all week this week, all day long, for real. So thank you.
Wow.
Hey, we do what we can. Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing that I've been thinking about is on the ball fields, St. Edward ball field, and sports fields like that. I believe that there might be an opportunity to have the user groups, the leagues and that sort of thing, contribute some to donate to help with the match part if we do go for grants. And so I would like to see if that could be explored or what that might look like.
If I could just add to that, I would like to echo that, and it looks really good on a RCO grant application if you have even a token amount of money from the leagues.
Councilmember Curtis.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Herbig.
So late last week, I got an email from Katrina Rose about, she was forwarding a news story about the King County elections is looking to quadruple the number of the ballot drop boxes throughout King County. And she was saying if Kenmore, what we could do to advance that in Kenmore. So I forwarded over to Rob, and Rob already has Patty working on it before I was able to bring it up here. So I just wanted to let you guys know that apparently we're working on trying to work with King County on placing a drop box in Kenmore for our residents.
Good job. Outstanding.
It's an hour more. It's more than an hour worth of staff work, but I just automatically assumed you guys would want to do it. So, yeah.
Good. Deputy Mayor.
Okay. The last newsletter, there was an article about recycling and listed all the things that we take. And one thing that was listed there was fluorescent tubes, which don't work too well, and they break easy, and storage is a real problem. I see it just doesn't fit here at City Hall. So I inquired to Kathleen. She gave me a website to go to, or a phone number. I called the guy. I can't remember the name of the recycling nonprofit that coordinates all this. And they line up different businesses or public utilities to take recycling of bulbs, the fluorescents and the LEDs and other hazardous material. Well, supposedly Lake Forest Park Hardware, Town Center Hardware will take them, and Lake Forest Park's Public Works will take them as well. He was looking for someplace in Kenmore, and I suggested they contact the utility district that they might be willing to serve the community in that way. They give them drop boxes to put the glass in, and then they pick it up from them periodically and so on. I took my 10's the maximum number of fluorescent tubes that you can take in. I took them down to Town Center Hardware, and he looked at the box. He says, "You didn't buy these here." I said, "No." I just took them out of my light fixtures when I changed them and accumulated them over time. So next time, try to buy them here. Well, look, I don't know. I guess they're taking them as a service to the community, anticipating that they're going to get some goodwill and people are going to shop there more. But it didn't set well with me when I was greeted that way. So there, or the public, I think the Public Works place is a little farther up Ballinger. They will take. That's all I have tonight.
They've contracted with the state. They have to take them. So,
yeah.
Whether you buy them there.
Oh, I know, but the greeting.
So, just so everybody knows, because if somebody wants to object, then please tell me. They've asked me to be down in Olympia on Thursday to support the raising of the 1% threshold. I'm not going to speak. I'm not in favor of it, but I'm going to be a body that, because some cities will use it and need it, so I will be there. Paint. The paint take-back program is moving, and there's a couple of senators they would like me to have a word with, so we're going to do that at the same time. Also, when I was at the Economic Development half-day thing, I went to this thing and they were talking about traffic and how bad traffic is in the region and this, that, and the other thing. So I got up and I did my little sales pitch on Kenmore. 20 minutes from Seattle, 20 minutes from Bellevue, no tolls. Well, a developer, a major developer, came up to me afterwards. And the guy is developing Southport down in Renton, and they're finishing it up. And they're very interested in perhaps doing something here, but they're also very interested in starting their own private passenger-only ferry. So they've been in touch with me. They've asked me to come down there and meet with them and Dennis Law, the mayor of Renton. And then I mentioned this to Rob, and so Rob or Nancy will be involved in this also. So that's sort of moving on. So,
You're saying that they have a development in Renton and they want to do a passenger ferry from Renton to Kenmore and back?
That's look at
one of the ideas.
Kenmore, Kirkland, the tie in with light rail.
Interesting, very interesting.
So anyway, we'll see where that goes. They were also interested in developing some property around here, but since Lake Point is under purchase and sale, there are other opportunities.
There's also a volunteer thing tomorrow night here.
Yes, I was getting to that one. Tomorrow night there's a volunteer meeting here, and next city council meeting is next Monday. The ball fields is here next Tuesday, so that's rather an important one.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, if I can interrupt you, that was
Please.
what I was going to ask you. What is the format, since you brought that up, how is that going to happen?
The city manager will be happy to explain that to you.
Yes. So it'll start at 7, and people will kind of mill around, and staff and consultants will be there to answer questions, and they'll be able to look at plans and things. About 7:20, we'll go into a presentation that talks about why the ball fields, what we're proposing, and then we'll open it up to public comment. Folks will be able to come up and give comments, and we'll, after a few minutes or after a while, we'll cut that off and then allow people to provide written comments. And if there's time, we'll read some of those written comments. And the idea is to be done by about 8:30.
So,
it's a city-run meeting. It's our meeting. But Michael Hankinson from State Parks will be in attendance to answer any questions if there's questions for him and State Parks. Even though it's our meeting, a critical audience to this meeting will be the State Parks Commission. They won't likely be physically present, But how this meeting goes, the turnout, the comments will all be delivered to the State Parks Commission. And we'd like to bring a draft of that contract to them in late March at their March meeting in Olympia. And we're talking to them about whether they can seek State Parks Commission approval at that meeting, or if they would rather have State Parks approve it at the May meeting. So they're suggesting that the May meeting for actual approval would be better, but we're still having conversations with them on that.
Nigel, can you help me out? Do you know Clarksville, is that out of rules?
No.
It's still in rules?
Unless they did the rules.
On the House side, and we don't know about the Senate side. So tomorrow's the deadline on bills moving from House of Origin to the others, unless there is
unless they sprinkle some sprinkle some necessary to implement the budget dust on it,
yeah.
Which could happen, which keeps bills alive. So,
right.
But that is up to. Yeah.
But short of that happening, tomorrow's the deadline.
For it to be voted out of House of Origin, yeah.
Yes.
By 5 p.m.
5 p.m. 5 p.m. Yes, but they could sprinkle some budget dust on there and make it live longer. They do funny things on occasion. All right, anything else? Nobody has heartburn about my going down and appearing with Dow Constantine and whatever. Okay, with that, we're adjourned.